Right now, our friend Charles Cook from National Review is with us. Charles, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I am good. Will you be applying to become Jay Carney's replacement?
No, I don't think I will. I'm not sure the White House would warm to me, even if I wanted the job.
Well, no, I know that they wouldn't. But, you know, a British accent goes a long way in this country. I'm just saying, to open
Yes,
doors.
but do you think
even doors that might be shut otherwise.
Well, true, but do you think that it would help in a White House setting? I'm not sure.
I don't know. Never underestimate Brit privilege, my friend.
Yes, absolutely. I have really the trifecta. I have white British male privilege. I'm tall as well.
You are. You are very tall. Yep. Yep. Yeah, and people will see that next time you're down here, as a matter of fact. Lincoln-esque, I think. Can we go there? In terms of height?
Well, no, not, I mean...
And maybe a few other qualities.
Everything else,
but,
not height. No, it's... I really am evil in the moral hierarchy of the hard left. The worst of all combinations. When you go to France and you're British, you notice it in Paris, especially if you have an American fiancé, as I do. But in the hard left world hierarchy of evil people, a conservative white male Brit is about as bad as it gets.
What would happen if you... I want to get you to give a commencement speech at a college campus next year, just to see what would happen. I mean, just the eruptions, the riots that would ensue.
But you know what I want to say? And this is why they'd never invite me. I would want to say, none of you are particularly special. This generation is not greatly different than any of those that preceded it, and if anything, you have it much easier, despite the economic downturn. College is useful and fun in some regards, but does not make you better than anybody else. Don't try and change the world. The world doesn't need you to change it. Now, go and get a job. And I don't think that's going to sell.
No, but you probably get a lot of applause from the parents in the audience.
Well, I don't know, because they're the ones who are saddled with some of the dead.
Well, that's a good point. All right, you get a lot of applause from those of us who would not be in attendance, I suppose. Would love it on YouTube.
True, I think YouTube would really enjoy it if it ever got to YouTube. The cameras would probably be broken in the riots.
That's true. There's that aspect of it. Now, listen, I was just looking at a poll, a Huffington Post poll, that you know was desperate to find Americans are suddenly clamoring for more gun control laws, but that's not what they found. Not even 50% of Americans say that they want new gun control laws after the murders in Santa Barbara, California. And you got a piece out at nationalreview.com, and you say, when it comes to gun control, and you write about this piece at The Week, this guy, Tim Creeder, who says, we've collectively decided as a country that the occasional massacre is okay with us. It's the price we're willing to pay for our precious Second Amendment freedoms. We're content to forfeit the lives of a few dozen school kids a year as long as we get to keep our guns, says Tim Creeder. The people have spoken in a cheering civics class example of democracy in action. So Creeder would look at this poll from the Huffington Post and say, see, this is exactly what I said. This is exactly what I told you about. But you say it's not callousness that we're seeing here.
Well, before I tell you why Creeder's wrong, someone pointed out to me this morning and made a very good point, and one that I'd missed, which is that really, and this is unsurprising if you read his essay, which is rambling and incoherent as usual, really he argues two things at once, because he doesn't just suggest that Americans have taken the attitude that you just described. In other words, we don't care about these massacres, all we want is our guns. He also says that the only reason that there was no new legislation at the federal level after Newtown was that the NRA owns a handful of senators. Those two things, of course, are mutually exclusive, and I've missed that. You can't argue both at once. Either it's because the population, the majority, the voters, are not interested in our Callous, or it's because this small cabal of evil NRA types has got their hands on the legislators in Washington. But it can't be both.
But it can, Charles. It can if you're a gun control advocate. And you can have unicorns, too. because here's how you tie it together. What you're actually doing, this is a call to action for the American people to rise up and try to ban the NRA. As crazy as that sounds, the gun control groups, I think it's what, CSGV, they actually have this hashtag, End the NRA. And that's, I think, that's how they try to tie this two together, is that the NRA is, you know, they've got these corrupt senators in their back pocket, and the American people are too apathetic to do anything about it. And look at the toll of violence, and it's not until the American people rise up and demand that something happen to the NRA that we'll actually see any meaningful legislation passed in Congress.
Somewhere, in the one time there's an organization in American history has been banned, not sort of banned, not partly banned, not operationally banned, but outright banned, was the Ku Klux Klan in the late 19th century, and that was deemed, quite rightly, ugly as the Ku Klux Klan was and is, to be unconstitutional. And you know who was fighting the Ku Klux Klan at that time, literally with firearms, was the NRA. So somewhere in there's a little morsel of irony. But let me tell you why Creeder is wrong. Creeder is wrong because in order to believe what he does, two things would have to be true, and they're not. The first is that Americans believe that gun control will stop shootings such as the one we saw in California and will lower the gun violence rate. And the second thing would be that they don't want them. Now, it's certainly true that by and large, Americans don't want more gun control. There are a few topics where they will say yes. And if you ask certain questions in a certain way, you can get an answer you want. For example, if you say to somebody, should we ban the vast majority of handguns in the United States? Then they will say absolutely not. That has very little support. If you say to somebody, should we ban semi-automatic firearms? They will say yes. And that's, to my mind, a misunderstanding of terms rather than any actual disparity. By and large, there's very little support for increased gun control, and it's been going down. Now, that's not because Americans think, and this is where Creeder begs the question, that it will work but don't want it anyway. It's because almost nobody thinks it's going to do anything. And I cite not just one, but three polls from three different points in history, I think one from each of the last 3 years. But in Rasmussen and Reason Root, these are not out there polls demonstrating that Americans do not believe, not just that gun control in the abstract, but the Toomey-Manchin bill, the set of proposals that were put forth after Newtown, would do anything to reduce violence. I think the highest support for the notion that it would is about 32%. I can't remember the exact number, 32, 33%, and the rest seem to be lower than that. So, you know, his presumption there is that we all know that gun control works, but Americans are awful for not wanting it, and that's just wrong.
Absolutely, but this is, you know, look, I think this is part of the playbook right now for the left, is to try to shame people into thinking or acting the way they do, right? And if you don't, well, then you are shameful. You are part of the problem.
Yeah, well, we see it across the board. It's a typical debating trick.
Yeah.
What you do is you say, this piece of legislation will do that. And if you are against it, then you are against the beneficiaries. And you don't allow anybody to debate whether the first principle there, that this piece of legislation will do that, is in fact true. And so you name a bill, the Making Sure That No One in America Ever Dies Again Act, and 90% of the Republican Party says, that's completely ridiculous, government can't do that. And then Nancy Pelosi stands up and says, well, look at the Republican Party who wants everybody to die and is refusing to back legislation that will stop them from dying. The Republican Party is therefore pro-death, and it's anti-government, and it's extremism, and there's probably some crony in the corner who is pulling the strings. Well, we see precisely the same thing with any federal legislation that one might oppose on the basis of cost or propriety or because it should be left to the states. And we see precisely the same thing when it comes to gun control. They don't want to debate
Absolutely.
the record of gun control, which is terrible. They want to debate
Charles, I got to cut you off with terrible. I got to cut you off there. We're almost out of time for this segment. But thank you so much for coming on the program, and I'll look forward to talking to you again soon, sir.